When I'm writing, any novel, I want the reader to be fully immersed in that world. So that is my hope, really, that they are walking along with these characters across Tibet. But I also hope it makes them think about, the question of privilege and power and who has it and how we are exercising power in today's world. And what does it mean to claim a territory or to claim control over a region through exploration? Or what does it even mean to say you have summited a mountain, which is something that a lot of people do? But what does it really mean, and what is our relationship with the natural world? So, my hope really is not that someone reads a book and goes away with a neat moral lesson, but my hope is that it will make them think about these questions, because these are all important themes in the book. Our relationship to the natural world, our desire to tame nature, and also the desire of imperialists to control territory, and the use of exploration and cartography as tools for conquest. So when readers read the book, my hope is that they really think about those questions, and perhaps in relation to their own lives wherever they are.
Welcome back to Living the Next Chapter, the author podcast, where we can meet great authors from around the world. And I love this podcast because I get to travel and meet some amazing people that I probably would never meet in real life, just in my day-to-day. And Deepa's one of those amazing authors. She's joining me from across the pond, as we would say here in Canada. And I'm excited to have her here on the show and talk about her journey. And I think you're going to learn a lot from her. Deepa, welcome to the show. So glad to have you on the podcast.
Thanks, Dave, so much for having me.
Excellent. Tell everybody, where are you? Where are you in this big world of ours?
I'm in the UK. So yeah, as you say, we do say across the pond over here as well.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
it's a very big pond, right?
It is. I'm originally from India, and I've been living in the UK for a while now. Yeah.
Talk a little bit about what you do, Deepa, as well as an author and a writer. You're a very busy person. Can you tell people what you do, kind of like career-wise, in addition to what you do as an author?
I used to work as a journalist in India, and I did that for over a decade. And then I moved to the UK, where I studied creative writing. And post my PhD, I've been working as an academic. So I teach creative writing, both in the UK and at a MFA program, which is, in a residential kind of format, at Warren Wilson in North Carolina. So it's called the Low Residency MFA. So I teach at these two programs, and I also write currently. So that's me.
Nice. Okay, I want to put you on the spot here as a teacher. First day of class, a whole new group of students are sitting in front of you. You come in to speak and teach the class. What is your day one introduction to your class and how you run your class and what we're going to learn? If we were able to kind of audit the course and get in and sit with the other students, what might we hear from you on day one in your class? How do you introduce your topic?
It depends on the topic. So I teach, for instance, a journalism class, and then it's slightly different from how I run a class on fictional techniques. Typically, I offer an introduction to the course. I talk to the students about the books or the texts that we are going to read, what they can expect, and what they're likely to get out of it. If it's an undergrad program, unfortunately, these days we have to also talk about AI. And, I feel very strongly about it, both as a writer whose works have been plagiarized and as an academic who has seen, a drastic decline, I would say, in the critical thinking skills and writing capabilities of students. So I usually talk about that. I tend to run what we call or what we describe here as a decolonized classroom, in that I like to tell students that they have agency, and they can always write to me and tell me what they would like to see more of or what they would like to see less of. And that's an ongoing conversation throughout the semester. It's typically I offer an introduction to the course and I talk about my teaching methods. Some of the classes here in the UK have lectures, which is mostly me talking. And then after that, there are seminars in which the students get to contribute to the discussions as well. So I like to set up expectations, both from myself as to what I expect from students and what they would like to see from me as well. I think it's really important for them to know me as, in terms of my work. So I do talk to them a little bit about the kind of writing that I've done and the kind of journalism I used to do, for instance. And, I talk about my primary beliefs in writing and, how we can improve as a writer as well and what we need to do. So the first week tends to be more of an introduction.
All right. I'm curious because I haven't had a lot of authors come on and talk about AI and the impacts of AI on writing and the future of authors down the road. What aspects of writing do you feel that AI erodes for the next generation of authors? What aspects of writing do you think AI has a really big impact on for future authors?
I'm not really sure. I don't use AI myself. I see it in student work, unfortunately. And you can typically, at the moment, you can still tell that it's been written using AI because it's just a regurgitation of multiple facts and sentences and phrases that it's taken from, various sources. And so you can't really see the mind of the person who's writing. And I think what's so unique to writing at the moment is that it's distinctive. You can often tell who the writer is because of the way they think or because of the way they formulate sentences. And of course, AI has been taught to do that. So I understand that if you tell it to write in the style of Cormac McCarthy, it's going to do that. But there is still, because it does not have, our experiences, it does not have that a distinctive way in which it responds to a situation, because it's just an amalgamation of what's there on the internet currently. You can still see that difference. I can immediately tell there is not a mind behind this particular paper or assignment, for instance. But it is something that maybe I'm talking about AI because I'm currently teaching. That discussion is inescapable in academia at the moment. It's happening everywhere. And I think I saw an article in the New York Times today about how professors across the US or in North America are returning to blue books because they want students to write in the classroom.
Wow.
Yeah. I think it's, I do talk about AI in my classes, especially my journalism classes. I talk about what it means for the environment if we use AI. And, if to just answer a question, it's different from using AI for something that might be actually helpful. For instance, like a medical operation or a surgery, which a human couldn't do. But if you're using AI to answer a question, which you could do by just listening to, your professor and the class, then you're contributing to climate change. And is that what you want to be doing as a young person? I also talk about the fact that a lot of AI, language models are all based on plagiarized books and plagiarized texts, and none of the writers have been compensated for it. So it's illegal. And so I also try to make my students think about that. And lastly, a lot of language models have been trained by people living in countries like Nigeria or the Philippines, where they are paid, very poorly, less than minimum wage, to watch hundreds of videos of, say, traffic accidents or something violent and transcribe that so that the language models can be trained to describe that. And so what is the ethical question behind, if you are making use of material that has been created through the exploitation of others? So my attempt is definitely to reach through the students by trying to make them think about these things that they may not be aware of. I can't say that, 100% there is an effect, but I feel it's my responsibility at the moment to do that. And this may not be a view that's shared by other academics. Some are very AI positive. They try to integrate AI into their assignments. But as far as creative writing is concerned, I really don't think we can we can outsource our minds to AI. You don't need,
Well, yeah,
why study creative writing
right.
if you're going to use AI?
Yeah, I understand that. As a creative person, I'm a musician. I like to write
Yeah.
music. There's now a one button click that can create music, create a persona, create an artist, create music, write lyrics, one click of a button. And I'm like, the one thing about all of the AI that I almost see as an advantage is that when someone does write without using
Mhm.
AI, you're even more your work stands out even more amongst a sea of sameness and vanilla. Kind of everything's kind of the same.
Well,
And that when a single voice starts to write or share content or write music, it's different, drastically different, because it's not coming from a shared source. So I think for a writer that's listening who's tempted to just surrender their creativity to AI, if you lean into who you are as a writer, you're going to stand out. And people like Deepa's going to be able to tell what is human made compared to artificially created, right? So that might be your leverage point to be
mhm.
unique, is to really lean into who you are. AI has never had its heart broken. AI has never fallen off a bicycle. AI has never experienced these things. So it doesn't have a connection that a human would have with another human. So I think that's maybe our superpower as creative people, is to lean into that when a lot of people are leaning that way, maybe potentially. If we go the opposite way, I think that's going to make us stand out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think our flaws and our weaknesses, those are the things that make our writing unique. And if
Right.
you don't have all that, the result is something which is quite sterile, like what you see in AI writing. Um, I think a friend of mine once said, if AI can write like me, it means it has my mental health challenges, in which case, welcome. But until then, until it's as mad and crazy as I am, you're
Right.
just
Yeah.
going to ignore it completely. Yeah.
And I think we're the sum total of everything that we've experienced. Your time as a journalist in India has shaped
Abs-
you. You have seen things, experienced things that no computer can replicate, right? You are you. And how you approach writing would be completely different than how I would approach writing. So as you listen to this as a fellow author, listen to what Deep is saying and lean into who you are. And this perfect model of perfection with words and all that you get from these results are not really, it's not really you. So lean into who you are as a writer and as an
Yeah,
author.
absolutely. And I think, I would say AI writing may come without any grammatical errors, for instance, but it lacks anything that makes it unique. It's very sterile. And what makes our writing stand out is really, even the fact that we may not have polished a sentence as well as we could have. And that's what makes our writing stand out. So
Okay.
so even the idea of going to, trying to use AI to say, I'm having this particular plot problem, how would you solve it? For me, that really doesn't work, because I think, how we find the answer is how you often negotiate some of the other challenges in writing, like characterization. So, what you think is a plot problem, maybe a character problem, or maybe a problem related to setting, is only through
Right.
thinking through it, how long it takes, that you're able to answer that. While AI may give you a quick fix, it's not a really well thought out answer. It's just something anybody else might do, for instance. Whereas if you allow yourself to think about it, allow yourself to sit with that uncertainty for a little bit longer, you may come up with a solution which would not have occurred to anybody. And that's how I feel about AI and writing.
Yeah. I see it as a circle happening, kind of like a snake eating its own tail, where the results come out, the results are brought back into the AI models and then recirculated again and released again. And it's just taking its own words now. It's even bypassing the human side of it. And it's just recycling itself. And it's just getting worse and worse and worse in some cases. And I just see it disintegrating a little bit and again, as us as human writers, human creators, as we come out with our own unique work, it just stands in stark contrast to what's happening through these tools.
Absolutely. I agree.
Excellent. There you go. Well, I got the seal of approval from the professor, so I'm excited. This is really great. Let's talk a little bit about your career as a writer as well, Deepa. Like, what was it for you that took you from journalism into the world of writing and sharing stories? How did you make that transition?
I always wanted to write right from the time I was a child, but I grew up in a family without a lot of privilege, and it was inculcated in me right from the time I was a child that I had to find a job, and that writing fiction was not a viable financial model or a way to make a living. And I did absorb some of those lessons, but I wasn't fully ready to give up on writing completely. And I chose journalism because to me, it felt like a way in which I could continue writing. It wasn't fiction, which is what I wanted to do, but at least I would get a chance to write, and which is how I chose journalism. And I really enjoyed working as a journalist. It was a tough job, but very rewarding in many ways. But all the time while I was working as a journalist, I was thinking about writing fiction. I didn't know how to do it. I had trained as a journalist. I'd never studied English literature. I didn't have an understanding of any of the formal techniques in writing. And the only way I could do that was by, studying a creative writing course. And I didn't have any opportunities for that in India at that time. There was not a single creative writing course back then. And I always knew that if I actually wanted to study creative writing, it would mean taking a break from my career and going to the West. It just so happened that various personal, strange personal circumstances, I ended up in the UK. And one of the first things I did was to sign up for an evening creative writing course. And learning about craft, learning about techniques, it really changed how I looked at writing. So previously, I would read a lot of books, but I would admire the plot or I would admire the language. But beyond that, I could not really see what the techniques were that the writer was employing. But once I studied creative writing, I think the biggest benefit for me was that I could identify the techniques on the page. I could pull apart a particular short story, for instance, and see the various techniques that the writer had used to create a specific effect. And I could learn from that to how to achieve a similar effect. So I think one of the biggest benefits for me in studying creative writing was gaining some confidence to be able to write fiction as well. And so the transition was very slow. I think it took me nearly 10 years from starting to study creative writing to actually publishing a book, or maybe 12 years. So it was a very long process. Because I'd been a journalist, I was very wedded to facts. I felt that I could not really trust my imagination. And it took me, a long while to understand that I could just follow the character and go where they're going, and that I could rely on my imagination as well to create spaces and settings and not always have to, look at Google Maps, for instance, to make sure something is where I thought it should be. Yeah.
That's interesting how journalism has an impact on your writing. What was an advantage of journalism when you think towards your writing that you brought with you from journalism into your authorship?
I would say the ability to research, which was really important for me as a journalist. That's something I think that stood me in good stead in writing fiction. People often say you're writing fiction, you can make up whatever you want. I absolutely don't agree with that. I think, most fiction writers, especially if they're writing about marginalized or vulnerable communities, as I am, there is a responsibility on your part to be as accurate as possible, to depict the living conditions, for instance, of people as fairly as possible. So for me, research is really an important part of writing a novel. So my first novel, Djinn Patrol on the Purple Line, was set in an impoverished neighborhood in a North Indian city. And so I felt a great responsibility about how I portrayed the characters in that book, because these are not people who have access to the mainstream due to various structural inequities. So it was really important for me that if they were to read the work, they should not say that they were stereotyped or that, they exist on the page only as cliches. So a large part of making sure that I had fully fleshed out characters was research. And my next novel, which is coming out in January in North America, is a historical novel, which involved a fair amount of research in archives. So I think that discipline and rigor was something that I took from my journalism background. Yeah, so I think those were the advantages. But yes, the disadvantage was the fact that I had to learn to let go of the desire to know almost every single thing and speak to every single person, and also to be objective, because that's something that, at least the time in which I was journalist, we were meant to be objective reporters, whereas fiction is very subjective because it's on a character's point of view. So I teach myself to move away from that. But in terms of the benefits, definitely, that ability to research, to talk to people, to ask questions, that's something that has come from my background as a journalist.
Talk a little bit about the cultural influences for you as an author. Like, I'm here in Canada. I'm born in Canada, raised in Canada. I traveled a little bit, not extensively. So my worldview is shaped on where I'm from and what I've experienced, which would lead me to write what I know. You've been many places and experienced many different cultures. How does that shape you as a writer? And I'm just kind of curious from a writing perspective, should we as writers try to experience more culture? Would that help us as an author? What are your thoughts on that?
That's quite a difficult question. I would say, first of all, that, I grew up in what is called the Global South. So we are very aware from the time we are children that we don't have a lot of power in the world stage. And the way in which I, for instance, read American writers is not the way in which American readers read me. So my experience has been that there's a little bit of resistance in the West in doing some work in understanding complexities and nuances in the writing of a writer from, say, India or anywhere in South Asia. So you want some, for instance, if you use, languages from that part of the world, or if you have several cultural references that a Western reader may not understand, they feel that they cannot engage with the book. And I co-edited a collection of essays called Letters to a Writer of Color. And part of the reason for doing that was because I felt that both the publishing industry and the readership in the West are not really doing the work of examining themselves and of examining their own prejudices and biases. And, many of the writers in the collection who are really famous writers and writers I admire, they talk about their experiences. And even though each person's experience is different, there is a certain commonality to it, which is that there are certain expectations of what you're going to write as a writer of color. So if a writer of color is writing humor, then there's a question, why are you writing about this instead of, your country's independence struggle? So there's one such article by the Bangladeshi writer Deepa Anappara in the essay collection Letters to a Writer of Color. There's another essay on characterization, where the writer Tiffany Yannick talks about the influence of community in fiction by writers of color. That character cannot be seen as belonging to that of an individual, which is how it's often seen in the US, for instance. Whereas in other cultures, like the Latin American culture or in Asian culture, community is really important. Your character is very much shaped by those around you. It's not so much focused on the individual. So many of the ideas and helpful tips that are present in creative writing textbooks taught in the West focus on Western notions of how you should write. So part of the reason we put together, my co-editor and I put together letters, was to challenge that and to say that there are different ways of writing a story. So, for instance, I come from a culture which has a very strong oral storytelling tradition. And our stories may have several digressions. So a person doesn't just get from A to B as you would expect in, say, a Marvel movie, because person goes from A to C to F, and there might be several tangents before they get to Z. So it's the way in which we tell our stories are different, but there's a very limited understanding of that in the West. And definitely part of the reason we put together the book Letters to a Writer of Color was to say that please be aware that everyone is not going to write the same way. And it's absolutely wrong to expect a writer from India to write in the same way as someone from New York, And our languages, many of the Indian languages can be really lyrical and dense and very vivid imagery and metaphor. So expecting someone like me to write Raymond Carver, it does a disservice to my culture, which is not minimalist in many ways, or the way in which we express things may not be minimalist. I'm not saying everybody's like that. There might be someone else, another Indian writer may say, I'm completely minimalist. I don't know why I should be writing these ornate sentences. It's different for different people, but that kind of understanding is not there. So definitely the fact that I grew up in India, I spent, all my formative years there. It's shaped the person that I am. It's also shaped my writing, and there is no getting away from that. I know very well that I'm never going to sound like a writer who came out of an MFA program in the US, because that's my style. Yeah.
And that sets you apart and makes you unique and different from all the other authors, and that's special. That's why people come and fall in love with your writings, because of who you are. And I think that's something we need to lean into in this world of AI. Again, another example, but just another reason why human created content is so valuable, I think, in 2025.
Yeah. And just to answer your other question about culture and should we be experiencing more cultures, I mean, definitely, I think if it can make us more broad-minded, it's always good to have an understanding of what other cultures are reading and writing. This is why literature and translation is so important. And I think if you're trying to be a writer, it's good to read as widely as possible, not just in the genre in which you're writing, but other genres from other cultures as well, because it gives you a broader view of what is possible what is possible in writing and what you can do as a writer. I think it may be tied too closely. If you're trying to replicate another culture, then I think you have to be conscious of those questions of appropriation and the angle from which you're approaching it. So that would be the only caveat that I would add to that.
Let's talk more about your writings and for the readers, Deepa. Like, what is a good starting point for a reader coming to you for the first time? Where would you like to send them? Their first book from you, where do we send them? What's the first thing we should read?
So I haven't published that many books, and I would really hope readers would read my next novel coming out in January, which is called The Last Earth, which is a historical novel. It's set in mid-19th century Tibet. And it's a story about exploration and cartography, but it looks at these two subjects from the lens of colonialism. And, it's based on an interesting real-life story, a true real-life story, which is that the British, who were ruling India at that time, wanted to know more about the geographical terrain of Tibet, which was Tibet is next door to India. But Tibetans would not allow white people to go into their country. So it was known as the Forbidden Kingdom at that time. So the British surveyors and officers wanted an understanding of the landscape. At that time, the map of the world was mostly red. Most of the world was under the British Empire, and Tibet was a blank space on their maps, and they wanted to fill that blank space. So what they did was they trained Indians in very rudimentary techniques of surveying and cartography, and they sent them to Tibet to undertake these really dangerous expeditions to map out routes and find out the altitudes of mountains and chart the routes of rivers. And often they use their own bodies as surveying instruments. So for instance, they were taught to walk so that each pace would be exactly 31.5 inches. And then you put that together and you got a mile. So that was how they calculated distances. All this is there in the historical archives. It's not been discussed much. And I really wanted to write that story from the point of view of Indians who were forced to do that. And then when I was conducting my research, I also learned about female explorers who went to Tibet at a time when it was, women didn't have a lot of freedoms and they were wearing even extremely restrictive clothing like corsets. And the altitude of Tibet is typically over 10,000, 11,000 feet. And there were these accounts by a few women who had managed to cross into Tibet. So I wanted to write about that too. So the book has two interlinked perspectives, one of which is an Indian explorer working for the British, and the other is that of a female explorer. So that is the story. And it's really looking at how exploration and cartography were essentially tools of imperialism. And it continues to be that way even today. So, you might think this is something that happened in the 19th century, but as we have been seeing and hearing in the past few months, cartography, the naming and renaming of places is still, it's still a power move, so to say.
Right.
Yeah, so I think it's a book, though set in the 19th century, has a lot of contemporary relevance, unfortunately, because many of those subjects of imperialism, of colonialism, they should be discussed again, and because of what's happening around the world.
For readers, then I'm really curious. Like, how would you explain this to a new reader? What is your hope for a reader as a result? What's the finish line for this book that you're hoping a reader will cross?
When I'm writing, any novel, I want the reader to be fully immersed in that world. So that is my hope, really, that they are walking along with these characters across Tibet. But I also hope it makes them think about, the question of privilege and power and who has it and how we are exercising power in today's world. And what does it mean to claim a territory or to claim control over a region through exploration? Or what does it even mean to say you have summited a mountain, which is something that a lot of people do? But what does it really mean? And what is our relationship with the natural world? So, I mean, my hope really is not that, someone reads a book and goes away with a neat moral lesson. But my hope is that it will make them think about these questions, because these are all important themes in the book, our relationship to the natural world, our desire to tame nature, and also the desire of imperialists to, control territory, and the use of exploration and cartography as tools for conquest. So when readers read the book, my hope is that they really think about those questions, and perhaps in relation to their own lives wherever they are.
Talk a little bit about the research behind writing this book. How long did it take? Kind of like, as a journalist, I'm sure that this was really important for you to get the information correct for the book. How long did it take you to pull this book together from idea to completed work?
So I had the idea for the novel in 2009. I found a book about a British explorer traveling to Tibet in the 19th century at a secondhand bookstore in London. And what drew me to the book was the fact that right next to the title page or right after the title page, there's a photo of this explorer flanked by his two Indian manservants, as he calls them. And in the very first chapter, he talks about whipping one of them because they didn't polish his shoes properly. At the same time, he could not have conducted that survey or traveled to Tibet without the help of these two men who essentially kept him alive because he doesn't understand the terrain of Tibet. It's a very, apart from the high altitude, at that time at least, there were, they could have been attacked by animals, and it's a very isolated terrain as well. So there's no way that he could have survived in that landscape without the help of those two men. And I think that the fact that it was not just his photograph, but the fact that these two men flanked him indicates that. But at the same time, he definitely looks down on them. He doesn't see them as humans. So I thought it was a really interesting relationship between this white man and his servants, as he called them. And I was also thinking about these Indian men who were working for this white man and what was the nature of that relationship and how did they explain it to themselves that they were working for this man who were clearly looking at them, almost as slaves. So I think that was the starting point. And then I read quite a lot of books about explorations in Tibet. And it was interesting that almost all the books had that dynamic between the explorer and the person who was taking them into this territory, most usually an indigenous person. And I think what struck me was that some of those relationships or the dynamic of the relationship is something that we see to this day. For instance, if you look at Everest, there are all these Western explorers and there are the Sherpas who are taking them up those mountains. And there is often conflict between the Sherpas and the explorers. I don't know if you remember this, but at some point, in the last decade, I think there were huge protests in Nepal near Mount Everest because the Sherpas felt that, these Westerners, I can't remember which country they were from, were treating them very badly and that they were not respecting the mountain. So there is often that, for a person who's born in Nepal, the relationship with Everest is quite different from someone who just wants to climb it because these mountains and rivers are quite sacred to many people in that region. It's the same in Tibet. So the relationship with the landscape is different for the person who's from that part of the world. And it's completely different for the explorer who's looking at it only as, an adventure, something that's going to make them famous. So if you go to Tibet in the 19th century and you write about it, you're guaranteed a certain level of fame. Whereas for the indigenous person, the relationship with Tibet is sacred because it's a land of, for in Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism, a number of sacred sites are located in Tibet. People belonging to these religions believe that their gods live in these mountains, that if you take a dip in one of the lakes, which is known as the Mansarovar, you will be purified and all the sins of your lifetime will be washed away. So their relationship with that natural world is quite different from that of the explorer who doesn't have the same kind of respect. So this was something that I was, and I discovered that in multiple books that I read, how dispensable, for instance, servants were in that, often they would write about a servant dying in a single sentence, like X died today because they had a fever or suddenly felt it, and that's it. And then they're continuing the exploration. They never look back on the person who died. And so what I wanted to do was really bring the stories of, those people who are seen as dispensable to the fore, because it's not really there in any of the historical archives. The archives in India are written completely by the British who were ruling India at that time. And so we don't really see the people who actually, there's no way for me to tell what the Indians were thinking. So I really had to use my imagination to, come up with these characters and to write them. So it was a long process. I think I tried to write the first chapter around 2016. So it's writing it on and off. I was editing it up to last year. So roughly around 9 years, I think. Yeah. I did write another book. I brought out another book. I brought out the essay collection in between, but I was working on this on and off. Yeah.
Well,
I did
it's a labor of love
minutes.
for you
Yeah, so
then.
I did
Yeah.
visit a lot of archives. A lot of archives about India are here in London because the British were such strong record keepers. And you can find a lot of those documents here, both at the British Library and the Royal Geographical Society, which is collecting records of explorations from around the world since it was set up. I also looked at archives in India, and I think for me, the most rewarding bit was being able to travel to Tibet, which was such an amazing. Uh, it was an amazing journey, especially because China had closed Tibet, and China itself was closed for several years during the pandemic and post-pandemic. So it really looked like I wouldn't be able to go. But when they opened Tibet in 2023, I think, I was able to travel there. And then I changed the book again. Once,
Oh, did it?
once I saw the place myself, rather than, I wrote the book relying on all the accounts that I had read. And then I saw the place, and then, I had to make some changes.
It's interesting that a white person can come into Tibet as long as they're accompanied by someone from the country. People would probably still realize that these people, they're still coming, even though we said no to them coming, but they're just, because they're partnering up with someone from the country, they're allowed in. I'm sure they were very suspicious in Tibet of why these people were there and measuring and writing and documenting. Even though we said no, they're still here, right? So,
So the Indians would have been there as spies. So one of the
yeah.
things that they had to do was make sure no Tibetans knew what they were doing. So they
Oh,
kept it from Tibetans themselves, which is for me
wow.
interesting that they were, their allegiance was to the British rather than to the Tibetans, who they would have been closer to. Uh,
Yeah.
because many people living in the border areas at that time, they would have strong relationships with Tibet, and they would have had family in Tibet and vice versa. And despite that, their allegiance was to the British. So I thought that was an interesting relationship to explore. Today, I have to say, anyone can go into Tibet, but it's very tightly controlled. So you have to get very specific permits. You can only go as part of a tour. You cannot just, take a backpack and say, I'm going to travel around Tibet. It's very tightly controlled what you can see and what you can't see. And it depends on whether the Chinese government will issue permits. Um, a lot of Tibetans consider that a violation of their rights. And I don't know if you're aware that there is a strong resistance movement as well among Tibetans around the world who are in exile and who can't go back there because of the Chinese government policies. And a lot of Tibetans view the Chinese government as an occupying force as well.
Still tense. Gee. Okay. Let's talk a little bit deeper before we go about your website, because I want to send people to you to follow on and see your journey as an author and as a creative. There's so much on your website here. I love it. I have it up while we're chatting. There's a lot of great information for people to come and connect with you. Can you mention your website, Deepa? And maybe is there a starting point where you'd like people to go first when they come to your website?
There is an about page which gives you some information about me. And then there are pages for each of my books. So you'll find a couple of pages for The Last of Earth, which is the name of this novel set in Tibet. There is a bibliography, which are the books that I consulted while researching. So if you're interested in Tibet or in exploration, you may find some of the books and texts on that page interesting. There's a page on my first novel, Djinn Patrol, on the Purple Line as well. And a page on Letters to a Writer of Color, which is this essay collection that I co-edited, which talks about how, writing has to be viewed through the lenses of race and culture, and you cannot really separate it from your identity, and how it can be writing may be different if you're writing from India as opposed to, writing as an American. So I haven't written all the essays in that book. I only co-edited that collection, so I can recommend the essays by the other writers who've contributed to the book. And there's also some information about my journalism and short fiction as well. Yeah. It's essentially my name, so I recommend Googling my name, and it's one of the first things that will come up. Yeah.
Excellent. My name of the podcast is Living the Next Chapter, Deepa. So I like to ask my guests, how are you as an author, even with the launch of your new book, how are you living your next chapter? What do you have ahead for you?
So I hope to start working, or I've started working on my next novel. And but I've had very limited time to actually write because of all my responsibilities in academia, in life, and related to I'm doing the proofreads, the very last pass of the novel before it goes to print. So I've not had enough time. So for the next chapter, I really hope what I would like is some mental bandwidth and time to be able to write. Both are hard to come by in today's times.
Well, we could always just use AI. Deepa. Just it'll make a book for you, right? No.
Why would they? Yeah, why would
No, we
yeah.
won't. We won't go there, Deepa. We won't
I
go
think
there at all. Deepa, thank you.
I just want to say quickly that what motivates me to write often is I want answers to questions. So, for instance, for The Last of Us, the question was, what kept those Indians working for these British people who were not very, they were not good people in any way, but they were willing to work for them and often doing, even if that constituted betraying the Tibetans, who would have been closer to them, both in terms of community and culture. So that was, one of the questions that I wanted to answer by writing this book, and it's not an answer that you can find in the existing historical records. And so if, why ask AI to answer that question? Then how is it benefiting me? I'm not getting the answer. So, and it may not be for everyone. For other writers, these may not be the questions. Their question may be more personal. It may be related to the domestic sphere. Like, why is this the situation in my home? Or why is this my relationship with my mother? Or,
Right.
and those answers are so personal to you. Like, a machine can't give you those answers. And usually you discover, writing a novel or writing a short story is a way to answer that question often, even if it's not, if it's not truthful. But still, I think people often say that fiction is more truthful than, nonfiction. And I do believe that. I believe there is a kernel of truth in that.
So as a student in Deepa's class, before you go to search any question about anything to do with writing, put your hand up and ask Deepa in class, because you're going to get a better answer from your instructor than you're going to get from your computer. Deepa's right there in front of you, and the wisdom and knowledge and background and experience that you have, Deepa, is just makes you so creative and a great resource for any writer to write with creativity and to write with passion and to use their words in a great way. I think you're a super resource for those students. They're very lucky to have you as an instructor.
I might
thank you.
Might just take that recording and try to play that out.
You just keep that, right? That'll be part of their homework. Listen to this podcast, students. This is your homework for tonight. Thank you so much, Deepa, for being part of this. I'm thrilled to meet you and to have you on the show. And I've learned a lot just from our conversation today. Really encouraging everyone to come to your website, grab a copy of all of the things you've written, especially the newest book, and leave a great review for Deepa. I know she'd love to hear your thoughts about what you think as a reader, as you read her words, because that's going to inspire her to keep writing. There's little takeaways, there's information that she's going to pull from your reviews that, again, will just keep her writing and keep her sharing stories. I think we need to encourage our authors through our reviews. Deepa, thank you so much for being part of the show.
Thank you so much, Dave. Yeah, I really enjoyed our conversation.
Hey, thank you so much again for pressing play. As you've heard, great guests on the show. And one thing you didn't hear in this conversation is what? What did you not hear? Think about it for a second. That's right. Not a single solitary commercial for a mattress or a supplement or a whatever you call it. No. Why? Because we don't want to break up the conversation with commercials. So the fact that you're still here means that you are a fan of the show, I'm assuming. So if you want to help to keep the podcast going and to make me feel really happy, all I really care about is coffee, okay? I just got to be honest. I love coffee. I'm drinking one right now. It's starting to get cold. I need to warm it up. helping us with our Buy Me a Coffee link over at livingthenextchapter.com, and also in the show notes helps kind of keep the lights on around here. Remember, I'm doing this for free. I'm paying for everything. So I would love to have a little coffee donation, even $5 kind of fills up my cup. And I would love to enjoy a coffee from you. So if you're interested, again, thank you for listening. But you can use our Buy Me a Coffee link and fill up the cup. Thanks for being here.